You know, I've been here at the National Women's Republican Club on many, many occasions in the past, and have been proud to give tactical air support to Rudy Giuliani when he rescued our city from the abyss. And not just the second time, when he barely won, but the first time that people forget, when he first ran, and he barely lost against David Dinkins. And it was interesting, today I was reading what may end up being my adversary in the general election, Eric Adams, talking about how his mentor in fighting crime is David Dinkins. We average 2,000 murders a year under David Dinkins. So beware of people who all of a sudden have discovered law and order, public safety, quality of life, zero tolerance, who all of a sudden extol the actions of stop and frisk, but say, wait, maybe, possibly, could be, I don't know. We have a guy there who used to follow Louis Farrakhan, who now wants to do Aliyah in Israel, except he said, I want to retire to the Golan Heights. If anyone's been to Israel, you don't live in the Golan Heights. But that's what anybody believes that you, in fact, will consume and believe about a person running for the office that will determine the future of not only New York City, but let's face it, we are the economic engine for America, the state of New York, and especially the world. So what happens in New York City reverberates throughout our state, our country, and the world. And I think in my campaigning so far, in which I've talked to many Republicans, many independents, many Democrats, the one thing that has brought us all together, even when they've said, Curtis, I like what you do, I just disagree with your politics, I said, but we sure can agree that Comrade Bill de Blasio, the part-time mayor, the dope from Park Slope, has single-handedly destroyed the city of New York. And only on one occasion, a young man was entering a supermarket, and I was doing retail politics, which I love to do, in Bay Ridge on 3rd Avenue. And he came in and he goes, Curtis, I like you, Curtis. And he said, listen to you on the radio at WABC, but I kind of like Bill de Blasio. And I looked back at some residents of Bay Ridge. As you know, Bay Ridge is no longer the Republican conservative enclave that it used to be, but quite a few Democrats and followers of AOC, All Out Crazy, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the Democratic Socialists of America, the Justice Warriors, who want to destroy our country. Even they were behind me saying, he's not one of us. So let's start with the premise of Curtis Sliwa has been here at the National Women's Republican Club before. And I spoke on behalf of somebody that nobody knew. And if any of you say you knew him when he first ventured out, you're, as my grandfather Fidel Bianchino taught me, a chiacchierata. No. George Pataki. Nobody knew who he was. Mayor of Peekskill, assemblyperson, state senate. Nobody knew who George Pataki was. And he took on the iconic figure of the Democratic Party. They were already creating the 5th place up on Mount Rushmore. Next to Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln, and Teddy Roosevelt, they already were preparing a place for Mario Facciabulo, right? He was destined to become president, not president, Supreme Court justice. He was unstoppable, they said, in running for a 4th term. You remember that, right? And yet, there was a guy out there, George Pataki, who didn't have 2 nickels to rub together, who had no name recognition, who took out the most iconic Democratic figure in our lifetime. I mean, let's face it. His son, Andrew, is a pisher, is a shredder. Now, I'm going to throw Yiddish out there in Italian from time to time, because that proves you're a true New Yorker. But Andrew is no Murray. And let's face it, Andrew, for all he's done, with all the elderly people who suffered their demise as a result of his decisions, for all the women that have been perved, for the $5 million he made on the book, for the $18 million war chest, and the $2.5 million that we're paying his legal defense fund for in tax dollars. You think that out of all the people in the state of New York, that the person who should have been stripped of what they call qualified immunity, protection against lawsuits, should have been Andrew Evil Eyes Cuomo and not the police officers of the state of New York who are now going to have to go out. And yet, like doctors and lawyers do, malpractice insurance. Now think of that. Average police officer in New York, I know outside of New York City, the salary range, the benefits are a little better initially. $42,500 for the first 5 years. Many of these men and women living with their moms and dads in their basement, or they have to move way upstate to Dutchess in Orange County to find an affordable home of their own. Can you imagine we're now going to be asking police officers to get police malpractice insurance? First off, who is going to offer them policies? Will it be Lloyd's of London?
Yeah, I know, right?
Who would want to be a police officer? You're not making much money to start. And obviously you got to go out and get malpractice insurance. Have you noticed with the plethora of officials out there, they have stripped only the police statewide, from Buffalo to Brooklyn, of the protection that every other civil servant has. Judges who've unfairly put men and women away, DAs, assistant DAs, we've read of those situations. A mayor who was responsible for the demise of many of our institutions and our people in our city. They are all protected from lawsuit. Yet only the police can be sued. How much more do we have to render them impotent here, not only in New York City, but the rest of the state? And there's a move to do that throughout the rest of the country. And every Democrat who is running wants them stripped of qualified immunity. Every Democrat. The State Attorney General, Tish James, issued a report that impairs the police even more. I read through this voluminous report. When you finish with it, there's nothing that a police officer can do in almost any situation. They're not even reactive. Remember, they went from being proactive, the best police department in the United States, in the world, to a reactive police department, to now a non-responsive police department. All because of those who serve in office. And what's the one thing that they all share in common? They're members of the Democratic Party. George Pataki, Rudy Giuliani, Michael Bloomberg. As Republicans, they gave us collectively 20 years of Republican leadership as mayor, 12 years as Republican leadership as governor. And look at the problems that we have now. With the student of David Dinkins, Bill de Blasio, and Andrew Evil Eyes Cuomo, son of Mario Cuomo. Look at the difference, both before and after. Stability, progress, quality of life, law and order came with Republican leadership. Anarchy, Antifa, corruption in the name of Thrive, an organization created by Bill de Blasio for his wife Charlene, that has spent $1.25 billion in 5 years supposedly to treat the mentally infirm, those who are described as being emotionally disturbed, of which I deal with in the streets and subways every day. And I can tell you, in the 5 years of the existence of this program, never have I seen an intervention work. Never have we heard of one success story. You would have thought they would have put forward some man or woman who said, you know, on a day that I was in deep depression, on the verge maybe of committing suicide or doing harm to myself, I picked up that phone, I called Thrive, and it kept me alive. Right? You would think we would have heard one success. Have you heard it? No. Have you heard any of the Democrats talking about Thrive and what they would do to investigate this theft of our tax dollars and theft from the people, these lost souls who need so much help? Have you heard any of the Democrats take on pride? The only person you've heard take on pride is Curtis Sliwa, who says, the day that I'm sworn into office, Department of Investigation comes in, we want the spreadsheets, we want to subpoena the records, and I know a series of indictments will be issued, and we'll have And whereas as mayor, I will crack down on crime, as I've been doing for 42 years as leader of the Guardian Angels. Volunteers, mostly black, white, Hispanic, Asian, men and women, who voluntarily go out there and take inordinate risks in order to bring safety to communities, streets, parks, and most importantly, the subway. I think we can all agree, even if you disagree with my policies, my initiatives, my ideology, that nobody knows more about the subway system of all those running for mayor than Curtis Sliwa. I'm the only one who rides the subway today. And yet, believe it or not, I won't even get that. I don't even get credit for that. And you've seen our mainstream media act as if there are no Republicans running in a primary to take on the Democratic winner, right? It's almost like no coverage. Curtis Sliwa has always been a maven for attention, right, over the years. Some have said that's a detraction against what I've done. So you would think in a mayoral primary with so many Democrats, there are 13 running, and only now 2 Republicans, that they would have spent some time covering the Republican primary. And if you notice in almost every story, what do they write? Well, the eventual winner of the mayoralty will be determined on June 22nd, when the Democrats have a primary winner, although we know because of ranked choice voting, dead already, that may take days, weeks, maybe months to determine the winner. But I will promise all of you, when I win the primary, and I will win it on June 22nd, right from day one, I know all. I've been in every section of the city. Those of you who know me know that I've been in areas of our city where the only Republican that is known in those communities is Abraham Lincoln on a bill. And you know what they're going to do to me, because they know I have access into those communities of color like no other Republican candidate has ever had who's run for the mayoralty. They will do what they specialize in. They will try to dishonor me. And the 42 years of organizing Guardian Angels in the city and in 13 countries and 130 cities. They will call me a racist. They will call me a homophobe. They will call me a sexist. They will call me a misogynist. So we are mounting the money that is going to be necessary not only to take it right to the Democrats, because all we're going to end up with is a clone of Bill de Blasio. There's no doubt about it. There's nobody that stands out in that group as saying to me that they're going to be any different than Bill de Blasio was initially, when he promised and never delivered, and then eventually in the last term in which he impaled all of us. But I'm going to need that money to specifically mount a campaign to fight for what we know is right. The soul of our city, to resurrect it the same way that Rudy Giuliani did in 1993. To use some of the same methods that are tried and true, to restore a quality of life in our city that is non-existent at this point. And the way you do it is not by attacking those poor souls who roam the streets or live in the subways or in the parks, who are out there only because of the malfeasance of the so-called progressives, the so-called liberals, the so-called folks who say that they care about humanity, and yet they would leave a man or a woman out there who has no control of their mental or physical faculties, who has the mind of a child, wallowing in their urine and defecation, and they consider that being progressive and a caring humanitarian. No. You can crack down on crime, but you can be compassionate to the emotionally disturbed. You can be compassionate to the homeless, and I'll explain exactly how. And you can be compassionate to animals. I'll be running on an animal welfare line in the general, along with an independent line and a Republican line, because you know there are some Democrats, and I must tell you, my own father, Chester, and my own mother, Francesca, were never Giuliani Democrats. They were never Reagan Democrats, and they might not even have been Sliwa Democrats if they were still alive here. They were hardcore, grew up in union households. You couldn't even say Republican in the household. But they would vote for somebody on an independent line or an alternate line like some people would in the general election. And for some of you, I know you love animals, as I do. We have a shelter system in New York City that spends millions of dollars killing our friends, dogs and cats who are unwanted. I don't know if you're aware, within 72 hours of a cat, a dog, or another animal being turned into the old ASPCA, which is now Animal Care and Control, they are euthanized. They're put on a death list. I was talking with my wife, Nancy. Nancy, by the way, is running as a Republican for the Upper West Side City Council seat that Gail Brewer thinks that she owns. She's the first Republican in 10 years to challenge the Democrats in the Upper West Side after what they did to the Upper West Side with the Roswell Democrats last summer. But she is an animal lover extraordinaire. We live in a 320 square foot studio apartment in the Upper West Side, and we have 15 rescue cats. Every one of them was slated to be euthanized. And Nancy would run and just say, Curtis, I'd go. Today she called me crying. It was a little kitten, only a week old, that needed care and nurturing. Nancy contacted Animal Care and Control, said, I'll take this little kitten. And she arrived at Animal Care and Control in East Harlem, and they had already euthanized that kitten. This is going to stop. There will be no more killings of unwanted animals. Los Angeles has no kill shelters. Austin has no kill shelters. Other cities have no kill shelters. There is always a place that we can find, either in a sanctuary with a rescue group or people who want a little friend or a family member of their own. And just, I think many of you know, you would much rather deal with your dog or your cat than your husband or your wife, your children, your nieces, your nephews, your uncles, your aunts, your co-workers, and your neighbors. So those are the kinds of things that differentiate me as being completely different. Last night, after spending all day campaigning in a Republican enclave, starting in New Howard Beach, Old Howard Beach, Hamilton Beach, Broad Channel, the Rockaways, the Ponset, and Breezy Point, I ended up visiting my two youngest sons. I had visitation with them on the weekends in Forest Hills. And many of you know that their mother is the Queen's DA, Melinda Katz. And we were sitting at the table because they, like some of the other children, are finally being allowed to come back into their classrooms. They go to public schools like my oldest son, Anthony, does. And they're being taught critical race theory. No candidates are talking about this, except Curtis Sliwa. So the Department of Education, the acronym stands for dumbest organization ever, swallows up $30 billion of our tax dollars in a $99 billion budget. And one of their priorities is critical race theory. So they're teaching my three sons, almost like that, my three sons. You can have a TV series.
Yeah, that's right.
Because my three sons happen to be white, they are being taught that they are sons of white privilege, that they need to buck and bow and take a knee and defer to children of color and beg for their forgiveness. I mean, look, I'm embellishing it a little bit here, but that's the bottom line. And I told my sons, Carter and Hunter, don't you dare. Don't let those teachers poison your minds with that nonsense. Their other pet penchant now is forced desegregation. I happen to have gone in public schools in the 60s in Canarsie, Brooklyn, PS 114, Bildersee Junior High School. I witnessed firsthand the disaster of forced busing. Nobody wanted to be on those buses leaving their neighborhoods. Instead of improving the quality of the education in the schools in the inner city, they forcibly bused those children who didn't want to leave their neighborhood and forcibly bused children from the outlying neighborhoods into the inner city, the very neighborhoods that their parents and grandparents had left because crime was so high, the quality of life had negated itself. And now they want to return that. Now, do we really think that desegregation is the biggest problem in our public school system in New York? Do we really think we should be spending our money on critical race theory?
No.
Do we really think we should be giving billions of dollars to a bloated bureaucracy that still forces the teachers in the public school system to reach into their own pockets to buy badly needed school supplies for the children that they're caring for? Are you aware that teachers have to buy school supplies out of their own pockets when we, the taxpayers, fund the Department of Education to the tune of $30 billion?
Oh my goodness.
All of that is going to stop. And then they're talking about taking away gifted and talented programs. I sat in an assembly in Kew Gardens for both of my sons who were attempting to get into gifted and talented. And the results were, they gave me an IQ test and they had a conversation, although the parents and the guardians were not permitted in the room. Then my son Carter, who just became 13 and was bar mitzvah, and his younger brother Hunter, sat through that process, and it just so happened that the two children who did better than they did in the interview and the IQ test were two children from Korea, of Korean background. Now, some parents might have taken umbrage to that, and I looked and I remembered when I was a kid back in Canarsie. And I walked in on my first day at Gildersleeve Junior High School. Remember Arista? All children were doing academically well. And I said to my mother, Francesca, hey Mom, how come everybody up there is Jewish? Is it because they have Jewish teachers and they favor Jewish kids? And my mother Francesca, always so wise, said to me, hey, one yam, fatally fatatu, cheek to cheek. Little body today. She said, let me tell you, the difference between you, Curtis, and those Jewish children is after school when the bell rings at 3. What do? You're hanging out with your cousins, Joey G, the Cheech from Howard Beach, Lenny Beach, Beyond G. You're playing stickball, box ball, stoop ball, Johnny on the pony, buck, Ringalivio, and occasionally hot wiring El Dorados, Fleet the Bills to go on joyrides. The Jewish children are heading in the direction of the library. Maybe, just maybe, Curtis, you should be following in the footsteps of your fellow classmates, Ira Breskin and Lee Rose. I said, let me give it a try. And I followed them to the library, and I was introduced to the old blue hand matron. Remember how they used to run it? The library. You didn't return a book. Oh, it came to the door. They're knocking on your door, and they didn't need a warrant. It was a no-knock warrant. They wanted those books. So Ira Breskin and Lee Rosen took me into the back with the blue-haired matron, and they introduced me to the internet of the 60s, microfilm. Microfilm. And I love newspapers. Still to this day, I buy a hard copy. I was just marveling at all the stuff that I was able to learn by reading these old periodicals, these old newspapers that have been relegated to microfilm. My grades improved, my extra credit reports improved, and I found less time to be with Lenny Beach, Bianchino, and Joey G from Howard Beach. So nowadays, we want to penalize Asian families and Asian children for playing by the rules. After school, and they're not a wealthy lot. By the way, if you look at the demographics in New York City, Asian families tend to be considered in some of the poorest categories because when they come over as immigrants, some can barely speak English or no English, and some are working menial jobs. But they invest whatever money they have into tutoring after school. The children are told that the route to success in America, the country that they came to that provides them opportunities that they didn't have in their country of origin, was through education. And they're taking full advantage of that. And now we want to stop that. We want to cap that. We want to say to them, no, you play by the rules, but because you're doing so well, we have to force other people into the program. Well, I tell you this, as mayor, there'll be more gifted and talented programs, except we're going to put them in the inner city because Bloomberg took them away because not enough of the kids of color had qualified. I don't care if there are 4 kids in that junior high school who qualify or that elementary school. There's going to be gifted and talented. And there's going to be more specialty opportunities because there should be more specialty high schools, not just Stuyvesant or Brooklyn Tech or Bronx High School of Science or talent. And we're going to raise the caps on charter schools, which are held by CCNY and SUNY. There is an 8-to-1 ratio, mostly parents and guardians of color who light candles every night hoping their child will be picked in the lottery to go to a charter school. Desperately they hope for that. And then there are the parochial schools, of which I went to a little. Back to Jesuits at Brooklyn Prep in my senior year, shined their boots on my backside, kicked me to the curb, and I never looked back. But I had the best of both educations, public and parochial. The parochial schools need to be rewarded because all during the pandemic, and doors were open. But all of these schools are going to have to understand that we are putting too much pressure academically on a lot of children who are just not cut out for that curriculum. And that's why we are going to expand to the young teen vocational training. We're going to try to create for young men and women an opportunity to get jobs where the job market is desperately in need of people that we're giving visas. We're approaching people in foreign countries because we don't have enough skilled labor. And I'm not just talking carpenters and electricians and plumbers. But do you know that 1/3 of those who program computers for Google have only a high school diploma? Where did they learn that skill? In these professional schools that you get a Pell Grant for, federal dollars, when we already had a captive audience in high school and junior high school. That's all going to stop. And to many of you, as I know for myself soon, the need for home health care aides who are going to live with us. As I saw them from foreign countries rotate in and out of our house in NYC for the benefit of my father and mother who are having difficult times in their 90s. But the skill levels must increase exponentially. And we can train so many young men and young women in these careers because we're going to need them to do more than just turn over the sheets and empty our bedpans. You're going to have the medical training and the psychological training to deal with us. Because I remember when my mother was gripped in the first stages of dementia, how out of control she was at times, that I would have to get the call to go running over to deal with my mom. I'm sure some of you have been in that same situation. And she was saying some of the most horrible things towards the home health care attendant who understood this is what happens when you reach that point of dementia and Alzheimer's. And that's the other issue that is going to be addressed. Have you heard any politician talk about the looming crisis that we have with dementia and Alzheimer's? Do you know how many home health care facilities, and I'm not just talking about the ones that Governor Cuomo dropped the ball on that led to their untimely death? You know how many that I have visited in which there are rooms upstairs? Probably you visited them. They're brought out every day. And they're brought back at the end of the night. And they're not tended to. They're given no medical attention, no physical attention. Occasionally they turn one way or the other way, hoping that they don't get bed sores. We are going to expose to everyone the crisis that is happening to our elderly people because we must be compassionate. We cannot put window shades on our eyes. We cannot ignore these growing problems. But as mayor of the city of New York, I promise you, I will return the quality of life. I will return it to the point that you welcomed when you could freely walk the streets, take a train, and roam to the park. But most importantly, I am going to care for the emotionally disturbed, homeless, those with dementia and Alzheimer's, forgotten people as they are, and the animals who are our friends. That's the mayor of Curtis Sliwa.